Now dig into Phocuswright research. Scroll, Heart, Fly. Social media's impact on travel 2024. Please welcome Manager of Research and Special Projects, Madeline List.
So when I was a kid, I received some very good advice that instead of trying to live a life that was free of vices, I should think about ways to channel my vices for forces of good. I don't think a single wise person around me expected I was going to apply that to my bad habit of not knowing when to put down Instagram, but here we are, so I hope today you will benefit from the research I have been able to conduct as Phocuswright's chronically online analyst. We know that there is a lot of information already out there, both about social media usage and about usage of these platforms as commercial channels. However, within the travel industry, we couldn't help but feel like this information wasn't necessarily for us. Travel decisions are made with such a long conversion window. There's so much room for people to get lost remembering where they originally got inspiration from as they plan trips over a span of months, sometimes even years. There's also much less spontaneous or impulsive decision-making when it comes to trip planning. So compared with other industries that have done very well on these social channels, things like fashion, beauty, consumer goods, there was different kinds of information that we needed to understand some of these mindful, intentional consumers who plan over a long period of time. As a response to this, we designed a study that included a survey of 1,000 people within the United States who used social media to plan a trip that could include inspirational phases, general research, shopping for options, even requesting a booking, or sharing their trip content on social media from their personal experiences. I'm going to refer to these people as users talking about this study. Let's cover the baseline first. How common is it for travelers to use social media within their trips? Across the US leisure traveling population, we saw 57% of travelers had used these platforms either for those planning or sharing phases. This is obviously much more common among those younger age groups, under 35, but really don't sleep on that 35 to 54 age group either, because the majority of them are using these platforms as well. And what types of platforms are they using specifically? I've put up here some of the common elemental trip decisions that are made for planning, and you'll see 3 platforms come up over and over again as the most commonly used ones, regardless of the type of decision. Those are going to be Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We do see higher rates of usage of those platforms like TikTok or Snap if you just look at the travelers who are under 35. And I know there's a lot of buzz about Facebook falling out of favor or being for an older consumer, but we saw very high rates of engagement with travel-related Facebook groups, so that could also be responsible for a lot of the usage that we saw. And not every group out there is equally likely to use social media in their trips. The travelers under 35 definitely had some higher likelihood of using these platforms, but there are some surprising groups here also who are on social media a lot more in those planning phases. International travelers are going to more foreign environments. They want more information, resources, and they might also want to see more of those personal experiences as well from other users. Families traveling with children under 18 have their own specific sets of needs, and we see them much more engaged with social media for those planning phases specifically. And the power leisure travelers who took 3 or more trips in the past 6 months, they use a range of tech tools more to plan their trips, and social media is among them. But then the big question is, how much does it actually impact trip decisions? The spoiler is quite a bit, but there's going to be some nuance here in why and how. First, 62% of people who planned a trip on social media reported that they made a purchase or visitation decision as a result of content they viewed. This was more often positive decisions, things to do as opposed to things to avoid. And I'll refer to these folks as converters. What types of decisions were they making? Food and beverage and social media go hand in hand in a lot of ways. People want to know where to eat, where to drink, what to order. The cruising population is not a huge portion of overall leisure travelers, but within that subset, we see a lot of engagement in social media, and as a result, a lot of conversion there as well. And then rounding out the top 5, you have accommodations, sites, and attractions, as well as the destination selection itself. If someone used social media for planning a trip, we asked what account types they consulted, and if they had a subsequent conversion, we asked which of those account types they looked at led to them making their ultimate trip decision. What we found was that if a converter consulted accounts from creators, influencers, bloggers, whatever your favorite term for them is now, 72% of them attributed conversion to that account type. OTAs also came up very prominently here, as well as friends and family who they know personally. And there are some really interesting psychographics about the people who are actually making decisions through social media. An important one is they trust their own ability to navigate and suss out reliable content more. 63% of converters, as opposed to 48% of non-converters, say they know which accounts or channels they can trust for accurate depictions of what travel destinations are really like. And I know that's a self-assessment, but it also looks like this holds water in a lot of ways. Because when asked, when they finally got to the experience they saw on social media, how accurate was it to what was portrayed on the platforms, 2 in 3 converters said that it was accurate or very accurate. And what's interesting as well is that the perception of accuracy, or the reporting of accuracy, goes up a lot after people surpass $2,000 or more of trip spend per person. There are a few reasons why that could be happening. It could be that with social media and travel options, you get what you pay for. Higher price point options might be portrayed more accurately. It could also be that people do a lot more research if they're planning on spending more money, or that they're only willing to take the plunge and do something on social media if they feel really sure it is what they say it is. And there's also a community aspect to the psychographics of converters. They're much more likely to say that social media has allowed them to build stronger connections with friends and family, so don't neglect the fact that for them, this really is a social network. However, while we see these platforms can be very powerful for influencing trips, there are many reasons its true impact can go undetected, and that can be very problematic for marketers who are trying to attach a success rate to specific posts or even full campaigns. The first reason why this can happen is that a lot of decisions made because of social media are categorical decisions, meaning they relate to a type of travel option as opposed to something that connects to a really specific brand. And I'll give you a few examples. Of the people who had a conversion related to transportation, 2 in 3 chose a mode of transportation, like rail over air. If someone had a conversion related to tours or activities, 63% said they chose a type of activity. This was more common than choosing a marketplace or booking platform, a specific tour guide, or a tour operator company. And if someone had a lodging conversion, 51% chose a type of accommodation, like choosing to glamp or a hotel versus a short-term rental. And on top of that, as much as we all love seeing high click-through rates, click-throughs do not tell the full story. We asked people with a social media conversion and travel what their next step was after seeing the content that influenced them. Only 30% reported that they clicked a link in a post or bio, so it's a very limited metric for assessing the success of something. More commonly, people went to a general search engine and put in a query that allowed them to verify some of the information that they saw, or they double-checked the option on a Maps app or a review site like TripAdvisor or Google's reviews. And while we see so much success attributed to these platforms, there are also some concerning pieces of evidence that targeting leaves something to be desired and people feel quite under-targeted. 57% of users reported that the content that comes up in their feed reflects their taste in travel, and less than half reported that the content in their feed reflects a budget that they're able to access. That's a super practical barrier to conversion. If you're not showing people content that depicts things that they're interested in, and you're not showing them things that they can afford, they're just not going to go through and make a purchase. To put that in perspective, among these respondents who use social media for travel, the average per person trip spend was a little under $1,300. This goes up as the age groups rise, and it also is higher if somebody chose to go abroad, but social media is so awash with a disproportionate amount of luxury content, and it's important to remain grounded in what many of the people using these platforms are actually able to afford. And there are some interesting insights we see here too if you divide it according to a tier of someone's recent hotel stay, if they had one. Across hotel tiers, people are similarly likely to say that the content in their feed reflects their taste in travel, but the mid-tier specifically is less likely to say that the content in their feed reflects the budget they can access. To be clear, it would be good to get these numbers up across the board, but it seems like there's a lot of content out there on the side of the budget travel, the hosteling, the backpackers, as well as the other side with the high luxury content. And within that, the mid-tier, which represents so many people in the market, they can be somewhat neglected. What do I want you to take away from this? Let's go through a few key points. The first is that credibility, portraying things honestly, and building community and real social relationships among followers is going to precede any kind of sale that happens. It's also really critical to know the goals that you have here. These platforms seem to lend themselves very well for categorical conversions. So that might be great for you if you're a leader within your category, or if you're trying to boost awareness of an underrepresented or a not very well-known category. But if you're really trying to push a specific brand or option, you're swimming against the current a bit because people really do plan their trips over such a long period of time. It's easy to forget where initial inspiration came from, and you're going to have to do extra work to really distinguish your brand voice and memorability. Don't treat social as if it's going to be the bottom of the funnel. You need to have a strong, robust online presence because people will find you at other touch points after social. Think of it as an important kit in your digital toolkit, but it is not going to be the full story and is very often not going to be the final place where people have a conversion. On that note, don't conflate likes and shares with actual influence. There are so many types of posts that can rack up likes that represent things people won't necessarily do, because beautiful things can get likes. The floating breakfast in the Four Seasons in Bora Bora, that will get likes like it's nobody's business. The hammock camping that's suspended above the slack line, 5,000 feet above the ground, that will get likes, and it does not mean that somebody's going to do it. You really have to have a mind for depicting things that are accessible when you think about your content strategy, and don't neglect that mid-tier because there is that evidence that the mid-tier feels somewhat underrepresented. On top of this, it's important to ask about what kind of value you're adding to the conversation with your content strategy. People are using these platforms not just for a spark of inspiration, but for real planning. And planning requires things like details, information on locations, cost breakdown. A lot of social media content focuses on generality that doesn't necessarily serve those needs. And if you're thinking about collaborations with creators, the top reason we saw that travelers follow creators that post about travel content is to get ideas for their personal trips. The second most common is to get travel tips or hacks. So really think about whether you're working with people who serve those needs and give people what they want from following those types of accounts. Now, there's so much more where that came from. We have a special discount code for anyone who's interested in downloading some of our social media reports that have all this data and more available. Thank you so much for letting me share my research on stage again today.